and hello. My name is Dana Williams, and I am the Sales Enablement Content Leader at ATD. We are so glad that you've joined us for today's presentation. If your work is focused on sales training or enablement with an emphasis on development, please consider joining us at next month's Sell event, November 7th and 8th in Alexandria, Virginia. We'd love to see you there. Today's webinar topic is very timely, and I know it'll get your wheels turning. Please drop your questions in the chat, and time permitting, we will get to as many as possible before the top of the hour. Our presenters today are the CEO of the Brooks Group, Spencer Wixom, and he is joined by Joe Bigler, North American Director of Customer Care at Hitachi Energy. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Dana. Appreciate it. And thank you, ATD audience. Excited to be here with you today to have this conversation. Joe, I really appreciate you joining me. You and I have done some work together in the past, and excited to get together and talk shop about sales and sales enablement.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to join you today, Spence. Thanks for having us, and we look forward to a good discussion.
Well, Joe, since you're the guest of honor here, as I'm kind of pulling up our slide run that we want to share with everyone here, would you mind just give us a little bit more about your background? That'll kind of help us tee up the conversation you and I are going to have today. Just tell me a little bit more about kind of how you came into sales, number one, and how you got this passion for enabling and developing salespeople.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Spence. It's an interesting career path when you look back in hindsight, right? So I've spent the last 25 years, a quarter century, it's hard to believe it's gone by, in my career in various different marketing and sales roles. And I was fortunate enough to go through a large company. I spent that time in critical infrastructure the entire time. So it's been about powering the world, the globe, whether that's utility companies, data center companies, anything and everything around the world. And with sustainability in today's world, it's very there's high demand for our marketplace. So I graduated. I was fortunate enough to get a position in an early college rotational program at a large organization, and found my path into marketing and sales pretty early on. And I think that really stemmed maybe from my background. I really feel like relationship development, guiding and leading people towards a common goal that I probably gained growing up in competitive sports and playing sports in college and moving on. I really enjoy the passion of the chase, the wins and the losses. When things don't work out your way, being able to pick yourself up and move on to the next game or competitive opportunity. Or in the business world, there's a lot of parallels between sports and business. And so if you kind of harness what was really in my DNA structure with my background in college, moving into a large organization, it was pretty apparent that my DNA was fit for building relationships, driving results, building a team, and moving into a sales role and position. And that's where I've spent the last 20 years.
That's awesome. And from what I hear of your alma mater and such, they consider Joe never met a three-pointer he didn't drain. So.
Well, you wouldn't be able to tell that by my 5'10" stature, but I had to learn how to shoot because I couldn't see over everybody else. So yes,
hey, whatever gets the job done out there, right?
Exactly. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about, like I said, wins and losses, working with others, picking yourself up, how to treat other people, working in groups, and driving towards a common goal, which I think you can utilize both in your professional and personal careers, whether that's your sales attainment goals or working with your family and your children and teach them kind of life's lessons. So I apply it throughout my daily life in both professional and personal.
Completely agree. Well, look, we're going to jump into it here in a second. Let me just give kind of a little bit more of my background. As you can tell from some of the pictures that have been shown of me today and in my video here, I basically wear the same thing every day. That's try to be very consistent in that regard. But, I've had some sales careers in real estate and investment banking, but found my way into sales enablement and sales development about 17 years ago. And I've had a very exciting and fun career training, developing, analyzing, researching salespeople across that time. And what we're going to do today is we're going to share some research. We're going to share some principles and ideas that we put together as the Brooks Group. We're a boutique sales training and transformation company. We work with organizations like Hitachi, where Joe works. But one of the things that I'm excited about having Joe with me for this conversation today is we're going to look at all of the different complexities that are out there. It may be easy based on, what environment you're in right now is to say like, hey, it's tough out there to get buyer access for everybody, or it's tough out there to close deals at the final mile for everybody. But the actual reality of the situation is there's some organizations that are doing really well and are encountering some of the difficulties of developing and enabling people in those environments. Like there are organizations where the sellers are really struggling and they're having a difficulty enabling and engaging and developing sellers in that regard. And that's why, Joe, that's why I want you and I to kind of have that conversation, to look at it from all sides. So one of the first things I wanted to do to chalk the field is share back with the audience here, who have been very gracious in registering for this webinar, to share with us what some of your top challenges are. And we've tried to consolidate those and look at those, and we want to feed them back to you in a bit of a priority here to see what you shared with us. So this is going to be kind of one of those top three elements here. So number 3 issue that the audience said they were struggling with is measuring the impact or providing an ROI on a training event or a training implementation or a development implementation, for that matter. And what I think is really important about that, and we'll talk more about this, is that is how a lot of individuals and organizations listening in here get paid. That's how they substantiate their value to an organization, is when they can show that return on investment. I imagine that's important to you, Joe, and what you do is being able to prove to your organization, hey, this is the value of the effort me and my team are making.
Absolutely. And I think we have plans to maybe touch on that a little later, Spence. But yes, absolutely. We measured what our KPIs were, and we had a way of measuring it before we put our team in North America through some training, and a way to measure afterwards. So you could see that delta and define what benefits we gain from going through the training, what we've learned, and how we could kind of measure that.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at number 2 here. Building relevant, impactful, engaging training experiences. I think that's really important, right? I mean, the resources available to enabling and developing people today are scarce. And we have to make decisions to do that vis-a-vis maybe decisions to do other things in the business. And so when we're making those moves, when we're implementing development and training in the organization, we want to make sure it's as powerful and as relevant as possible. So we hear you, audience, on an important thing. Also, number 1, just to move us forward here, are how do we react to market conditions in the economy at large? Like, how do we understand what are the best ways or methods or principles we need to develop in our sales team to react to that? Joe, I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in your experience in your organization, I know you identified a very particular thing you needed people to do differently or better, right?
We did, yeah. Would you like for me to touch on that now, Spencer?
Yeah, let's introduce it now, and then we can kind of dive into it a little more deeply later.
Yeah, I saw in the chat there was a question about keeping the sales organization motivated during low retail sales periods of time. So we might have to touch on that, Spence. But yeah, it's really a good segue into the market conditions and environment that Hitachi Energy is currently experiencing. I think in the sales world, we're all taught to chase every opportunity, bookings, get the order, right? It's kind of the mantra in most cases. And we're in an unusual time in the critical infrastructure space, and power in particular, and what we manufacture at Hitachi Energy. There's really more demand in the industry than there is capacity to build equipment. So we find ourselves in a bit of a predicament. I guess if you had low business levels, that's one challenge. When you've got too much business, that's probably the lesser of two evils, but it certainly brings additional challenges. And those challenges are lead time, on-time delivery performance, supply chain bottlenecks, rising prices and commodity increases of materials that go into manufacturing our equipment in a just-in-time environment. And so, Spence, what we found was not so much that we were out really chasing opportunities, but we were really looking to provide our team that is interfacing with customers on a regular basis with some type of common language, some type of tools to put in their toolbox where they could address difficult conversations. And those difficult conversations were, thank you for your business, but your lead times are extended. We're most likely not going to meet our ship date. And oh, by the way, from the time you placed your order till now, the price has risen. And so we're going to need to talk to you about that. And where we really benefited from working with the Brooks Group was looking at our North American customer-facing team and providing them with some tools, like I said, to put in their toolbox to understand themselves better and to better understand the dynamics of the folks that they were talking to, whether that's engineers, sourcing people, and understanding what it is they're looking for, how better to diffuse a situation, and be able to communicate utilizing that common language was really the driver behind our reason for having a training session across all the North American facilities.
What I find so interesting and kind of a principle behind what you were talking about there, Joe, and we'll move forward and kind of explore this a little bit more, but is the idea that, okay, we see something in our sales organization that needs addressing, that there's a challenge, they're hungry for something. And so the person who put that in the chat, right, of, okay, how do we motivate retail salespeople when there's not a lot of people coming into the store, right? It's a challenge, it's a difficulty, it's causing strain, it's causing emotional burden on these salespeople. Okay, we've got to give them language, tools, processes, something that they can hang on to and do that gives them a little bit more confidence in doing the difficult work that comes with a job in times like this. And again, that difficult work, as you were saying, Joe, it can come in times of famine and it can come in times of too much feast, right?
Right.
There's complexity, there's difficulties inherent in all of that. The big thing you have to address, I think, in sales enablement and development is that change. Is when the market environment has flipped or something's happened where sellers are kind of put on their heels a little bit and are like, I don't know how to react to this. You've got to understand what it is that they're dealing with and be able to address it very directly.
Yeah, imagine you're in sales and part of your overall compensation is an incentive to grow the business or to hit certain targets or bogeys or budgets. And you bring back some opportunities, and the factory says, "Look, we appreciate it, but we just can't do it." So that can be hard to keep the team motivated in that regard as well. The other side,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, let's jump into it. Let's talk about our agenda for today. What we want to cover. So we're going to dive a little bit more into current market conditions, and just to kind of identify what's going on. And our hope is that those on this webinar will see in their organizations, in the worlds and where you operate, some of these trends as well. And we can talk a little bit about how to at least think about them and potentially address them. But some of the ways that we think are most important, just generally for addressing what's going on, is number one, understanding your sales team. We talked a little bit about that just a second ago. Understand where people are coming from, understand what they're struggling with. And there's tools and there's methods, there's ways to do that. Then secondly, or number three there, is to create training experiences that work for them, that provide them that motivation, that confidence. And there's some specifics in those experiences that we need to think about. And number four, delivering value and measuring the impact. And we want to talk through that a little bit because that's such a critical part of substantiating both to individuals and to the organization that you've done something positive and that there is momentum behind the investments that you've made. So let's talk about current market conditions. This image here is probably symbolic of what a lot of people are dealing with when they look at what the market is providing right now. And we definitely have seen, and this is what Joe and I were just talking about, changes in buyer behavior. And it is those changes in market behavior and buyer behavior that often throw salespeople off and create that anxiety and create that need to develop new language, new tools, new ways of doing things in the organization, train them on doing something different to react to that. We know in a lot of instances, and a lot on the call today or on the webinar today probably are experiencing this, you got a lot of buyers who prefer remote or fully digital interactions. I was having a conversation the other day with an organization in the industrial space. They build industrial equipment that needs to be engineered into facilities. And what they're saying is, we have this new generation of engineers, millennial, Gen Z engineers coming in that our sellers are interacting with. And they're of the mind that they can find everything they need online to properly engineer, properly design a system for the facility or the building. So they really don't have any need to talk to our salespeople. And our salespeople are struggling to have those interactions even with existing customers because of that change in buyer behavior. And we see that in our second point there as well. They go through that decision-making process quite extensively before they proactively reach out and engage with sellers. And we tend to have buying groups that are growing in size, growing in diversity, growing in complexity in ultimately making decisions. Joe, I know your situation is a bit different in that, they are kind of after you sometimes. These buyers are calling you guys up. But I would imagine you're seeing some of this particularly in the number of individuals involved in this decision-making process and the number of kind of touch points or contact points that your sellers have in managing these accounts.
Yeah, for sure. And, to your first point here, first of all, during the COVID era, we were, fully remote, but I think I was one of the first folks back on a plane. If COVID occurred in early to mid March of 2020, by June, I was back, flying again because we value the face-to-face interaction, both in our offices and with our customers, on being able to sit around a table and hash out some issues. And not everything is always black and white and can be found online. I think there's a lot of benefit to building a relationship, understanding somebody's problem, and working towards a solution by being in front of customers and working with your colleagues face to face in some capacity. So, with that being said, our typical buying pattern is through engineers. We have maintenance engineers, design engineers, and then through a number of various different supply chain folks or sourcing managers that we need to talk with too. And depending upon the size of the opportunity, it could be executive level management that needs to approve. So there are quite a bit of touch points in our sales cycle for sure that we need to engage with. And so 6 to 10 decision makers is about right what we see in our business. And the sales cycle can take quite a bit of time unless they're a repeat buyer.
Joe, I think you just mentioned something that I think is really important to flag here, which is you will have, and I think this is particularly true of buyers of these newer generations. They're going to resist those live meetings because they're just not, that's kind of the way business was done back in the day. But right. I think the issue there is they don't know or appreciate how effective, particularly when making complex decisions as a group and trying to understand the complexity of the solution that's going to be implemented in your organization, how beneficial it is to get people together to hash that out. Yeah. I can't even count the number of times in my career where I've had buyers resistant to a meeting with me, right? Taking a live meeting with me. And at the end of the day, we insisted on it. We said, hey, look, we'll come to you. We made the investment. We made the forward motion to get that meeting. And then after the meeting, maybe when we're out to lunch together or something, them saying, and they almost do this universally, they say, God, I'm glad we did this. I really appreciate you coming and spending this time with us.
I couldn't agree more. I actually have a specific example. About a month ago, I made a trip to Canada to meet with one of their large utility companies. And for months, maybe even years, we've been talking about their buying patterns and looking at how they purchase and when, and the regular cadence, and how that impacted our load plan in the factory and the efficiencies. And we've been telling them all along, like, look, this is kind of how it works. This is when you should be placing orders. This is when we need to engage. And they didn't really get it. And so because of that, it fluctuated how much equipment they would get in a timely manner. Well, we finally flew to them. We went out to see them. We sat down for 2 hours in one of their conference rooms. And I hopped up with a whiteboard, impromptu, grabbed a marker, drew out a chart and said, here's what it looks like. And just like you said, Spence, when the meeting was over, they're like, I wish we would have done this a long time ago, because that really made sense. We've been trying to do it virtually for so long and try to map it out with various different folks until we were all sitting in a room. and mapped it out on a whiteboard and walked through it, we weren't really speaking the same language. But now I think we're in much better alignment, and it's been proven to be effective here the last 6 weeks since we've left that meeting. So I'm a big proponent of sending our folks out to go build relationships, get in front of the folks at the working level, and kind of work a bottoms up approach in building relationships and understanding your business model and the problems that keep you up at night, and understanding a little bit about how we operate too.
Yeah, I just want to share one more point on that I think is really important here, which is it's kind of a connected benefit to what you were talking about live meetings. Just ask yourself, right? How many Zoom calls that I've done in the last week or so do I clearly and accurately remember? And then ask yourself, how clearly and accurately do you remember this meeting in Canada that you just described to me? And the answer is you remember the latter much more than you do the former. And why? It's because movement, experience, being in a new place, new people, experiencing something new together, that's the scaffolding of episodic memory. That's what we remember. And we really have to accept that universal fact. And I think this is why developing the capability of your sellers to have powerful meetings and interactions like that is so important. And this goes back to the individual who raised the question about, like, how do you motivate salespeople, retail salespeople in a slower retail environment? Is I would think help them appreciate the power and the value that can come from each interaction. When that individual comes into the retail store, they are not on their own turf. They're on new turf. They're creating new memories. But the salesperson they interact with in that store is going to be part of that memory. And if that salesperson comes up to them and says, hey, are you doing okay? Or do you need any help? Joe, what's the response that they give, that you would give 99% of the time when somebody asks you that?
If somebody asked me if they needed help, how can I help? What can I do?
Well, because you go into a retail store and the person comes in and says, do you need any help?
Oh.
And you tend to say no. I'm just looking. Right?
I thought you meant if I was greeting that person.
Yeah.
Apologies for misunderstanding. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, I probably walk in like, oh, I'm sort of just browsing around. No help yet. Maybe I'll let you know, kind of thing.
Exactly. Right? Or do you have any questions? No, right. I don't have any questions. That's an experience, right? But it's not a particularly memorable experience. So you want to think about, how can we make that experience with that customer memorable each and every time? And, one thing that I've seen in the past is asking that open-ended question, what brings you in here shopping today? I can't answer that question with no or yes. It doesn't make any sense. I have to express some information, and that creates a dialogue, and that's a very memorable dialogue. And each of those dialogues, particularly in today's environment, is critically important. Each of them is very valuable. So look, let's jump into it a little bit. We've got a very complicated buying journey. I think Gartner has illustrated this as good as anybody with the spaghetti bowl here. And I think what this really tells us in this convoluted journey that buying groups go through with the very many stakeholders and all of the complexity that they do to get to a purchase decision is that we really need to have processes, frameworks, ways of interacting with customers that help guide this and simplify this. And if your people aren't interacting with customers in a consistent, thoughtful way, they're going to be taken down yellow brick roads here. And so what does this all lead to, right? Well, it leads to sellers feeling uncertain or frustrated that they can't do the job they were hired to do, that they need to do. They feel like they have a lack of confidence or control over the process. We know that prospecting is more difficult. We know that access is harder to find, right? There's more than 300 billion emails being sent every day. That's 3 times, now about double the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Very difficult to break through all of that noise and engage with people. And even when we do, and we've got these accounts moving forward, we tend to find those late stage disruptions or pushing decisions into the next quarter, or having no decision outcomes. As a very good group called DCM Insights has been doing some interesting research recently on late stage no decision outcomes, and they affect nearly 40% of business to business deals. So we've got sellers who are dealing with a lot right now, right? And they need to feel that greater confidence, certainty to be able to engage in their jobs. And we'll talk here in just a minute about how we understand where those sellers are coming from. But, you know, Joe, your situation is a little bit different than this, but I imagine there is some kind of frustration, lack of confidence when you see your buyer behavior change as well in your space.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're like I said, we are in a unique time in that we've got a lot of different drivers in our marketplace. You need power to drive, data centers that's being pushed by the impact of AI. You see electrical vehicles, and so there's power requirements for that. So the market is very dynamic right now, and our buyers' behavior is quite interesting. We do our best to make sure that we are professionally communicating our message to the folks that are buying, that look, hey, we're here to partner with you for a long-term relationship is what we're really after. And given the situation and the market conditions of our environment, this is what we can do. And we're listening to you, and we can't do everything you're asking us to do, but this is what we can do. And so it has the buyers looking at us in a little different approach these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so then we've got the priorities of the sales leaders, right? In reacting to this. I mean, number one, they got to deliver on that number. They've got to find a way to motivate these salespeople to hit the outcomes that the business needs. They've got to keep those sellers focused on the job at hand, right? What we don't want to be doing is pulling sellers away or distracting them from the activity, the execution that they need to do. But at the same time, every time we make an investment in developing, strengthening our salespeople, we need to be thinking about what is the return to the business on that investment? Will it benefit us? And so all of these elements together are kind of where we want to go here. We want to talk about getting to know our salespeople, giving them effective learning and development engagements that help strengthen them both in the classroom and after the classroom, and then how we measure that so that we're addressing the needs of the sellers, as I talked about on the last slide. We're also aligning to sales leader priorities. So let's jump into, first of all, understanding your sales team. And Joe, I'll start with you. I'd love to get your perspective on when you were really trying to understand kind of where your sellers were at, what they were struggling with. How helpful was it to, in a sense, diagnose that, gather some data, some information around understanding your sales team before you took a development action, decided on a training, figured out what you were going to do next?
Yeah, no, great question. Well, first of all, we knew we had an issue. We knew we had a problem where we were putting people in an uncomfortable position, and that in our marketplace we were having to find a professional way to basically let people down. And if you wake up every morning and come to work knowing that, okay, who am I going to disappoint today? How am I going to disappoint somebody today? It became very tasking, exhausting on folks. And so we knew that we had to engage with another firm like the Brooks Group, and as an example, and say, look, how can we have these difficult conversations? How can we train our folks that are talking to customers on a daily basis to talk about rising prices, inflation, long lead times, supply chain bottlenecks, and constant delays in the marketplace that's disappointing just about everybody? And the first thing we did is we said, well, we got to better understand ourselves. And we did that through, the assessments that we issued to our team to better understand who they are. I mean, I'm sure some folks are familiar with the DISC assessment process, but we gave that to all of our teams so they could better understand who they are. And quite honestly, it's amazing what you learn about yourself. I brought mine home, I pinned it up on my refrigerator, and I told my children that this is how you talk to dad. It's amazing what I learned about myself. And then by doing that, we created, and I think I used this earlier, Spence, a common language. And it's funny now to go around to our different teams and go into their offices and see them with their DISC assessment up, or that they've identified that they're a high D or they're an I. And so when you're approaching them, you have a better idea of how you need to talk to these folks internally. think it brought our team closer together and made us understand each other a little bit better. My manager uses it to decide, okay, I got to send somebody to go see a customer. I know if I send Joe, he's got this set of skills. But if I send Joe with his colleague, then maybe those two going together are going to offset and work well together, be a better environment for that type of meeting. So we first utilized the assessment to identify ourselves, and then took that to the next level to say, now that we understand how this works, now we can better appreciate who we're talking to and how we tailor our messaging to the folks, whether it's in sourcing, engineering, supply chain, or what have you. And I think it's just paid off huge dividends for us.
That's awesome. And one of the things that I think is really important for us in understanding ourselves is to see where we have those strengths and where we have those weaknesses, right, as sellers, because everybody's different. Everybody is wired somewhat differently, and getting a deep understanding of that is important. We've been doing a lot of research into that. Recently, we've been looking at the personal skills, the personal skill set of sellers, and we look at thousands of those sellers every single year. And one of the things that we're seeing that really helps organizations identify where they have development gaps or whether they have development needs is this pretty consistent decrease in capability across a number of areas. And I'm listing here on the slide the ones that we've seen have been most pronounced in the last few years. Sellers' ability to self-manage, their resiliency, their self-starting ability, problem solving, personal accountability, goal achievement, planning and organization capability. We're seeing all of these kind of tick down across the average in organizations. So we know that every organization that we work with has some combination of these that is more difficult or less difficult for their people. And once you get that understanding, then you have managers who can effectively coach and develop sellers around these areas. They have a lot more understanding of each individual seller's skill set. What's interesting is we are seeing one skill in all of this set tick upward, and that's the skill of empathy. And we think what we're seeing in this market is because it is so difficult out there for so many sellers, they're empathizing more with their customers. They're wanting more to help and encourage and support their customers. But they just lack some capability or some confidence in doing it. So the kind of the meta theme that we're sharing out there is we've got sellers out there today who are more virtuous, but just less capable. We've got to figure out what their capabilities are and are not, so that we can strengthen that capability set. And assessing them is an important step in all of that. When we think about assessments, we're kind of trying to cross this chasm, right, or this gap to better capability. And what you mentioned earlier, Joe, right, understanding your communication style or your behavioral style through something like the DISC assessment is critical. Also, understanding how sellers are motivated, right? What's their motivational profile? What drives them to behave differently or to interact differently? I just shared what we have seen with some of the personal skills and some of the hidden difficulties in kind of personal capability and personal skills that are out there that organizations can assess. And then you also want to look at those tactical selling skills and where their capability is in that regard across a sales process. Do they understand situationally how to act, how to react in different sales situations? So if I would encourage this group that's listening in here in any way, it would be think about each of those different elements as you're understanding your people. How do they behave and communicate? And can you assess and understand that? You can through things like the DISC assessment. How are they motivated? Those differences in motivation make a big difference in engaging people and keeping them active and trying in difficult times. What are their personal skills? If you can identify certain personal skill strengths and weaknesses, you can tailor their job to support those, or you can give them the coaching and support they need to strengthen. And then do they have the tactical acumen to execute a sales process in each of its steps? I would highly recommend focusing in those 4 areas to really understand your people. You can make for a much more productive development journey when you do. So let's talk about creating training experiences that work, really focusing in on the experience itself to making sure it's as memorable, as effective, and can be leveraged as well as possible. One of the things that we always recommend when thinking about developing your salespeople is start with a frame, start with a common, as you had said earlier, Joe, a common language, a framework that they can build their capability off of. We have what we consider a very elegant and simple process to kind of compartmentalize all of the training and development we call impact, and goes through kind of a sales process start to finish, and has different stages in it that you can, number one, assess, and number two, develop people around. Joe, I'll ask you this question. When you were trying to identify the experience, the training or development experience you wanted to give to your people in having those difficult conversations, how did you contextualize that, or how did you understand that or plan that initially?
Yeah, well, I was tasked with this initiative to train our customer facing folks across North America, and we have multiple cultures, we have multiple facilities. So what we did is, first and foremost, and we touched on it earlier, but we thought that it was very, very critical and important that our first training session was to be held in person. And so that we had a facilitator travel to our facilities in North America, and we had folks come to that facility, and we asked them and said, prepare, you have plenty of notice in advance. Please take this assessment, come ready. You're basically laptops down, devices off to the side. You're out of office for a day because we're making this investment in you, and we want you to take this experience and make the most of it. So we did this all in person, and we basically had a traveling roadshow, and we had multiple facilities, one's in Canada, 3 across the US, and we brought our teams into these facilities for an entire day to interact with each other, to break out into group sessions, to be with the facilitator in person, to receive their assessment, and really spend an entire day doing a deep dive on who they are and how they can take these tips that we're getting through the training sessions back to their real world activity. And then after that, we had 5 virtual sessions and follow up to say, now that you've done the in-person training and you've gone out into the real world, every couple of weeks we bring back the group virtually with another facilitator to say, okay, what's going on in the last couple of weeks? What are some real world situations you've been placed in? How did you react? And how could you have done it differently? And or what best practices can you share with the team? So for us, it was a combination of in-person training followed by virtual, and we took that very, very seriously.
Now, I love a couple of the things that you just said there, and let me kind of unpack them as best practice. Is number one, you gave people that space to prepare. You said, this is a very important thing. We're attacking this issue. We're setting this flag in the ground. So we want to get everybody away from your day-to-day job. We want to bring you together, and we want to focus on this. And kind of communicating beforehand, we're going to give you new language. We're going to give you new tools. We're going to give you new process that you can apply. Get them ready for that training experience.
Right.
The other thing that I loved of what you did there is you taught them a little bit about themselves as well. We brought in that assessment to help them understand, okay, you're going to understand yourself. The facilitator is going to understand you as well. And that's going to make for a more effective experience because there's that understanding beforehand. And then also setting that commitment of, this is not a thing we're just going to train and expect you to go away and do on your own. We're going to reinforce it. We're going to encourage it. We're going to follow it going forward to make sure we get an output.
Exactly right. I mean, when we evaluated this, we looked at a lot of different companies, and many of them were solely virtual training sessions. And we took it very serious that we didn't think that was going to be worthwhile. I can tell you myself, I had a training session this morning from 7:30 till noon. I had multiple presentations between there. I was on and off multitasking during it. And quite honestly, I left the pieces and portions of the training session that I did participate in, not really, benefiting from it at all. So, I knew that that's what our team would do. So it was key to bring them all in together. It built some camaraderie. It put us all in the same spot. We were focused on it for an entire day. And I think the benefit was much, much more impactful.
I agree. So it is a matter of, we talked about kind of setting up a framework, an idea of this is where we want to develop. This is the language we want to incorporate into the organization. And then we think about those fundamental skills that we're building on those sellers to get stronger on. And if we can help them get a vision for these are the fundamentals we're going to help you do differently, we're going to help you do better, we can get them more excited and engaged in taking that learning journey with us. One thing that I think is really interesting that we're trying to do, and I very firmly believe in this, as a provider of sales training, transformation programs, one of the things that I'm highly concerned about is scrap learning, scrap experience, or for that matter, scrap materials. What I am pushing for in my work and in my research and everything that I'm trying to do is how can we eliminate any waste in these experiences? And I'm not just talking about like environmental waste when all of the binders get left on the tables, right, and get thrown away by the hotel staff or the training room staff or whatever. I'm talking about how can we create tools, templates, materials that people really want to take with them and use, that they don't have a sort of careless attitude toward or look for a round file to put them in. They're thinking, no, these are things that I can actively use and engage with. And that's been a lot of our effort in designing materials. When you thought about the experience that you were wanting to engage in, that you were wanting to have for your people, how did you think about making that experience as effective as possible with as little waste as possible, Joe?
Yeah, interesting point, because I sit here every day. It's funny you have that. Mine sits on my desk, and I utilize it all the time. And I utilize it for my team as well. So I nearly have about 40 folks on my team, and understanding them and knowing before I get on a call as a leader, understanding who they are, how they like to be approached, was really beneficial to me. And I think once you take an assessment like this and you have it printed out for you and you look at it and you read it, I think our team was super surprised on how spot on it was. It made it very interesting for them to take a look at themselves and understand that by answering a few questions, it could really give you some insight to who you are. So I know that our team utilizes this takeaway of the assessment very well. And, there's I think a pocket takeaway that we had that I keep with me as well. As a matter of fact, it's sitting right here, and it talks about that DISC assessment and understanding the D and the I and the S and the C and who falls into those categories, who might work well together on a team, who I could shuffle around for certain scenarios. And so I know, Spence, that we all the material that we received was very well utilized, and that we all take it very seriously and keep it with us and utilize it on a daily basis. So not a whole lot of waste in our experience when we did our training.
No, I appreciate hearing that. And I think a couple of the points that are important, these are the principles that I'm trying to follow around this. Is number one, when you have material that talks about you, when it gives information about you, you tend to hold on to it. And right. Like that's why you have that report about you, that assessment about you, because you're like, well, this is valuable. This teaches me something that's personalized to me, so I want to hold on to it. The other thing that we try to do is we try to design materials in an elegant way that fit in the flow of work of salespeople. So a big 3-ring binder or a big spiral bound 100-page book, you're not putting that in your purse or your bag or whatever you're taking with you when you're on the road. So that tends to sit on a shelf, and maybe you pull it off a time or two and flip back through it. But eventually you're looking to clean that shelf up, make it look a little cleaner. And that's probably something you can get rid of, right? But when you have something, like you were saying, little field guides, little cards, things like that can go in notebooks, like a moleskin notebook, that's something you tend to carry around anyway, that can fit in travel bags and purses and such, you tend to hold on to it and you tend to use it. And the quality of those materials is important as well. When people feel like something is of quality, they hang on to it. When it doesn't feel of quality, they tend to discard it. And all of those little elements in planning your training, in my estimation, are critical for its efficacy, both in the day, in the experience itself, and going forward.
And Spence, one last thing that you might find interesting, and I'm not even sure we've talked about this in the past, but one of the things we did at our organization too was we made it kind of special in that, not only do we have a couple of handouts and takeaways that I know the team utilizes, but we also gave them, hey, you completed a training course, you completed this assessment, you spent the time. And so we gave them the option to print out the certificate. And some folks put that up in their office in their queue, but maybe more importantly, they add it to their LinkedIn profile. It's on their resume. Hey, I completed an impact in selling a difficult conversation course. And that's something that they could take with them. And I know feedback from the team was this was valuable for me to take on and better myself. And that's something I could carry with me, whether I'm still with Hitachi Energy in 10 years from now or I've moved on. So I think that is valuable as well. Not so tangible, but valuable.
I agree. It's all those little touches you want to think about and making that experience valuable, not only then, but going forward.
Yep.
It's interesting when we talk about blended learning, right? And you and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that after that experience can be particularly powerful when it's a live experience, getting away from your work, doing digital reinforcement, having a digital platform that gives you some micro learning and some modules and things like that, but blending that with coaching. We have seen when we reinforce training in our organization that having digital reinforcement is good, having coaching reinforcement is good, having coaching and digital reinforcement together can be even much more powerful. And I know you've designed a lot of that into what you do as well. Now, in driving utilization, that's a tricky piece, right? And some of the things we want to think about in driving utilization of our digital reinforcement programs, or how can we make it have a competition element, a gamification element, showing leaderboards, showing people's progress towards some proficiency level. People love that. I always like to say you want to make your reinforcement like Wordle, right? The little thing they want to do every day just to see how good they are at doing it. People get enticed by that. They get excited by that. They like to see, you think about all of the Wordle conversations that were happening when Wordle was a thing a little while ago, right? In the morning, it's like, oh, how many tries did it take you to get the word, today versus before? And you were kind of in that competition. If you can foster that type of an environment with your reinforcement, it can be really strong. And then, of course, having those internal stakeholders, those individuals like you, Joe, who are subject matter experts who are driving that implementation and that reinforcement home and listening for that change in quality.
Yep.
Now, in the interest of time, I want to talk about measuring the impact and delivering value, because you have a really interesting story here that I think is important for people on the webinar to understand. Yes, it is important to substantiate knowledge transfer. Yes, it's important to substantiate transactional return to the business from the investments that we make in training. And we should absolutely be measuring those. But you shared something with me the other day that really got me thinking, and it's more around measuring the quality of the effect what you're doing is having on the customer. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. We take we call it continuous improvement. We take continuous improvement at our organization very seriously, and we have a bunch of different metrics. I'm sure folks are familiar with NPS. We have transactional NPS, we have relational NPS scores, Net Promoter Score. So we certainly measure that. We do all this through our continuous improvement efforts, through sending out customer surveys, requesting feedback. Now, it's a little different than walking into Panera and getting a receipt and and filling it out right there. In our world, we kind of personalize a little bit. We have a conversation with the customer. What we say, hey, this is coming, be on the lookout for it. We're really trying to increase our overall return rate on these customer surveys so we can capture the feedback, both good and bad. So we did that for about a year prior to any type of training on these difficult conversations we gave to our team. We do that on a scorecard. We call it Bowler. It looks like a bowling scorecard. So it's very simple. It's got 4 or 5 KPIs. It's green and red, and we were able to capture the data and measure that. And one of the things we get back from our surveys and we capture in our Bowler and on our scorecards is that we were not doing so well on responsiveness, ease of doing business, customer communication, providing documentation with our products in a timely manner. We were in the red on all of these things. And then that's what really drove the decision to say, okay, we've got to probably staff up. We've got to equip our team with communication tools and soft skill sets and how to have difficult conversations. And that's when we implemented these training sessions. And we continued to monitor it over time. So the training has been completed in our North American facilities for quite some time. I actually just had a functional North American review with our senior leadership today, did a report out on our KPIs, utilizing our bowler as the template. And now we have green on responsiveness, green on ease of doing business, green on customer communications. And what has flipped for us, which is indicative of our current market environment, is on-time delivery, lead time extensions, missing, committed ship dates. So we recognize by going through this process of continuing improvement, monitoring through customer feedback and surveys, that we've been able to flip that narrative around. And the team that I manage, that's really their job, is to improve the communications, be responsive, and simplify the ease of doing business to increase the overall customer experience. And our team, when they get that feedback on-time delivery, quality, missed ship dates, then we coordinate a meeting with the parties to be to say, here's the feedback we got. We're letting you all know. Let us know how it's going to be resolved, and we'll communicate that corrective action back to our customer. So it's been a really defined process, and we've been able to turn things around as far as communication since we've had the training on the difficult discussions. It's been, worked out great, and the proof is in the data.
And what I love about that, what really inspired me about your story there, that I just wanted to make sure I shared with this group here is, and I tried to articulate this this way before, is, yeah, you can do training and development to do business better, right? To sell more, to have larger average deal sizes, to have shorter cycle times, to have, higher win rates. And all of that is important. But at the same time, when you think about the long game with customers and that long relationship you want to have with your key customers, you want to develop people to do better business, to be able to engage, manage, be a stronger, better presence to your customers. And my favorite thing about what you just shared there is you were able to measure that, right? And you measured that because you were very careful to look at your status quo data and look at where you were on all of those points of feedback from your customer. Then strategically plan a training and a development implementation to address those exact needs, execute it, and then measure it over time. And you see that change in customer perspective. And that will not only pay you, I think, near term, because as you've been able to have those conversations more effectively, you've improved the relationship with your customers. It will pay you long term, right? Because customers remember that. They remember the experiences they've had with you, and those experiences drive a desire to do more business with you more often.
Exactly. And my team really impacts that kind of repeat buying pattern. And, we say this often, that we know that the market is healthy and strong for us now, but this won't last forever. And how we treat our customers today, they'll remember when we're going back to say, hey, we know we were in a certain dynamic and market conditions previously, but now we're back, searching for orders and prospecting more often and looking for additional opportunities. Those customers are going to remember how we treat them today when that time comes. So yeah, very important.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, look, in the interest of time, we've kind of covered our three main topics, right? We've talked about understanding your people, assessing and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your people, taking care of the details to make those training and development experiences as powerful as they can be, reinforcing them through a blend of modalities, including coaching, digital reinforcement. And then in your measurement, thinking not only about measuring knowledge transfer, application, and return to the business, the kind of typical Kirkpatrick stack, but also thinking about, are we measuring change in perspective on the part of our customers, indicating that we're doing better business? But I want to take just a couple of questions with the few minutes that we have left. And it looks like from some activity in the chat that we may have some. Dana, do we have a couple of questions?
We do. Okay, so first up, in terms of sales professional personal profiles, how do these profiles that you're speaking of relate to the challenger sales model or strengths finders? Where do they fit in your overall framework?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a lot of different ways to assess people, right? Myers-Briggs is an example, StrengthsFinder is an example, that great Challenger study back in the day that profiled different salespeople using a factor analysis in a clustering exercise, which was great. We're talking about very specifically understanding capability of salespeople at a deeper level. And that is understanding the way they communicate. Using that DISC profile. Are they dominant, influence, steadiness, compliance? What is their kind of combination of that? What is their combination of motivational drivers? Are they theoretically motivated? Are they utilitarian motivated or individualistic motivated, social motivated? Understand that's at a very deep level. It's what drives them to do work, right? When you measure personal skills, you're looking at how clearly and capable are they in acting in a lot of the ways I mentioned earlier, in managing their time, in managing their effort, things like that. And then with the selling skills, can they go into a situation, a discovery situation, an investigation situation, a negotiation situation, and apply the right principles and the right thinking to that situation in the moment? And there's a lot of different ways to assess this, right? Some of it is personal preference, and some of it is actual test assessment. It's giving them various options and seeing if they select the right one. The various sciences that we use get at that level so that those sellers have a much deeper, stronger understanding of themselves.
Great. And I guess along those lines, you talked a lot about seller motivation and tapping into understanding what that is. Any specific way that you can, profile for that seller motivation, or at least define different categories of motivation?
Yes, absolutely. To go a little bit deeper, that's a great question. Motivation, we tend to measure around 12 different axes. We call them 12 driving forces, but they really come in 6 categories, right? And I mentioned a few of them earlier. Is somebody theoretically motivated? Do they love learning? Is that what motivates them to go to work? A lot of college professors are very highly theoretically motivated. Utilitarian motivated. I want a return on my time and my effort and my investment. A lot of salespeople are high utilitarian. Individualistic. I want to be rewarded or recognized as a top performer. Again, sales has a lot of individualistically motivated people. Social motivation. I want to do things for the common good of society. Traditional motivated, I like to follow norms and values. And aesthetic motivated, I love harmony and beauty in the world, and that's what motivates me. Artists tend to be highly aesthetic motivated. Yes, you can measure all of those different motivational elements and provide individuals with a skyline of their motivation. Super helpful for managers and leaders to know how to coach, develop, and strengthen people if you understand their motivational profile.
That's amazing. So I've got 2 more for just like quick answers as we're getting to the top of the hour.
Yes.
Question came in about AI and the role of AI and how the Brooks Group is experimenting perhaps in working that into its solutions.
Yeah, look, my excitement about AI generally is its ability to do a couple of things. Number one, to serve up for individuals content or opportunities that relate to what they're looking for most effectively. And I think there's some interesting new work coming around that. Secondly, is to be able to take what it understands about you and apply that to give you recommendations around things that you can do differently. Now, that's a lot of go forward stuff. AI is just coming into vogue right now. I think there's going to be a lot of development around it over the next couple of years, but I think it's a very exciting technology that's going to have a big impact in this space.
And speaking of recommendations to close us out, somebody asked if you had some recommendations around your favorite selling books.
Joe, I'll let you start with that one. What's a good selling book for you?
Man, I should turn around and look. I've got a couple. I don't know. I don't know if it's a great selling book, but I love the Lee Iacocca story, to be honest with you. That's the one that I booked, more about leadership, I think, than the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is always a staple, right? But to me, it was more about reading about how people led teams. I think that I found interesting. You probably have a better answer than that, Spence.
No, that's actually a great answer. I do want to just make a quick plug. Oh, we don't have the slide in here. Agile and Resistant is a book we've put together for sales leaders and sales enablement leaders in the post-COVID environment. That was written by Michelle Richardson and Russ Scherer on our team. I think that's a very valuable resource. I wish I had one within arm's length here. I'd show it to you. Another one that I've been reading recently that I love is called The Tao of Sales. It was written by Dr. E. Thomas Baer. He passed away a couple of years ago. I'm not even sure how much this book is still in print, but it's a fantastic philosophical journey into selling and aligns very closely with a lot of principles that I very much believe in. But thank you for that question. That was great.
Good. And thank you both for such an engaging and informative conversation. This has been a wonderful presentation, and I will turn it over to our webinar manager for some closing remarks on logistics.